I'll rise just to make a few remarks on the substantive bill and then make a couple of remarks regarding the two amendments that I have co-sponsored with my colleague, Senator Davey. This is, trying to think, probably the sixth or seventh inquiry that I have been involved with during my time as a senator. Having come from a defence background, the welfare of our veterans is important, and it has come before the Parliament on multiple occasions. And what this bill seeks to do is something that a number of stakeholders for many years have called for in terms of simplifying the system so that we can put into effect what the Chief of Army, current Chief of Army, said in his opening remarks at the Land Forces Conference last year, is that this is a once-in-generation opportunity to reduce suicide and suicidality, and that we can and must do more to ensure that we do not leave our mates behind, fallen on their own personal battlefield, end quote from the Chief of Army. The challenge we have is that this bill, the 8 schedules that were originally part of it and were subject to the inquiry by the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, and I see the Secretary of that committee sitting here in the chamber, so thank you for your work and your team in helping to facilitate that, as well as colleagues have highlighted, the surprise 9th schedule that has come in regarding the Commission. And that does a lot to rectify some of the structural changes that are required and to bring about some reform that will hopefully make the process easier. But it's important to remember that this process is dealing with people, individuals. And I notice that the Royal Commission highlighted in their report that the risk and protective factors interacts in complex and unpredictable ways in people's lives, and similarly, exposure to known risk factors for suicide and suicidality does not affect everyone in the same way, end quote from the Royal Commission. And what that means is that whilst I applaud and welcome a number of measures to make 3 complex bills somewhat more aligned and simple in one measure, that we have to remember that no structure in and of itself, particularly if there are rigid definitions, will achieve what the Chief of Army has talked about, which is making sure we don't leave any of our mates behind. While things like the Statement of Principles, which are going to be embedded into the new system, have proven to be effective in simplifying some decision-making, and I would accept the evidence that in many cases it has accelerated the decision-making, it has also had the perverse effect of arbitrarily excluding some veterans who perhaps have unique or unusual circumstances or things that weren't envisaged by the people who had put the Statement of Principles together. And if we are to achieve the Chief of Army's vision of not leaving anyone, any of our mates behind, we need to make sure that not only do we refine the process, not only do we put in place good measures. I welcome, for example, the fact that we have now gone from causality. Under Merker, we're now looking at a temporal connection. So the government and defence have essentially accepted the fact that you don't need to prove that your deployment, for example, to Afghanistan, is the direct cause with medical records to show it, but if you were there at the appropriate time on the kind of actions that have caused that, then that temporal causality will actually establish the fact that the Commonwealth has an obligation to look after you. You know, that's been a long time coming, and it builds on things like non-liability healthcare, where we have basically said if you're in the ADF, we will look after you. You know, that took a long time to come in. But it's those kinds of changes that meet the real human need, which are things that we have to have. So I'll leave my comments on the substantive bill there and just address a couple of brief remarks regarding the 2 amendments. As two other colleagues have indicated, there was significant surprise amongst the veterans community and ex-service organisations about the very last-minute inclusion of an amendment from the government to establish the Commission. And whilst we accept it's a recommendation of the Royal Commission, this is actually, if you read through the amendment, this is a body which is given quite remarkable powers. People will go to jail if they don't cooperate and work with the Commissioner, and yet there's very little transparency in terms of the appointment and oversight, costings, all the subordinate rules, regulations as to how it will run. And most importantly, it was not co-designed with the people who it is intended to benefit, nor those who have lived experience in the whole veterans and DVA system. And if there is one thing that governments of both persuasions have often talked about, it's the importance of stakeholder engagement and the principle of working with people who are going to be affected, and to put something in at the last minute with no ability for the Senate to scrutinise that, I think is very poor. Now, as Senator Davies said, we are not going to stand in the way of the passage of this bill because, as groups like the RSL and others have highlighted, we've waited too long for this, we should get this through. But we note that the Commission is due to come in September of this year, and the second reading amendment that the Coalition is putting forward is intended to provide the impetus to commence a review that provides the opportunity for the consultation that should have occurred before this amendment was actually brought before the Parliament. And so I would encourage people on the crossbench and in the government to support this coalition position, because what it's providing is an opportunity, even once the Parliament is prorogued, for stakeholders to say, yes, there is an inquiry coming. What comment would we like to make on this Commission? What do we think it needs to be able to do, so that when a new government is formed after the election, and even during the caretaker period, while the department is designing and working around what the Commission would look like, that we start building the evidence base for a co-design process, so in those months leading up to the commencement in September this year, at least there is an opportunity, which currently there has not been, for stakeholders to have a voice. And I recognise Senator Lambie has put her own amendment forward, which is welcome in terms of you've given thought to perhaps some changes that should occur, who appoints, etc. But I still believe there needs to be that broader consultation, and this amendment is intended to say, let's have a co-design process with the affected stakeholders, so before it becomes operational in September, we give veterans, their families, their support groups the opportunity to have some input into this Commission. And sorry, that is actually the substantive amendment that's going in. The second reading amendment goes to this issue of how do we pick up the individual, picking up on that word from the Royal Commission that highlights that every person responds differently. And I come to the Statement of Principles, where they provide a framework which some groups, and I'm going to refer here to an article which was actually written in the Examiner newspapers by Mel D back in December last year, because it's actually a very useful, succinct summary of some case studies and some of the issues at play. And so as I read some of these quotes, if you like, that's where it's coming from, but I've chosen this because it is quite a succinct summary of some of the concerns that various stakeholders have raised. So I've talked about the statements of principles and the fact that there's broad support by many within the community because they have expedited decisions for many people. But it's the interaction between the Repatriation Medical Authority, the RMA, and the Statement of Principles that is of some concern, because there appears to be a reluctance to consider, in fact DVA have come out and very specifically said that they do not want to make individual decisions unless the RMA approves a change to the SOP overall. But if we take what the Royal Commission said as fact, if we hear what psychologists and others tell us, individuals do respond differently. And so my view is that like we are having non-liability healthcare and presumptive liability and temporal connections as opposed to causal relationships, we should also say if a veteran has a couple of well-credentialed medical experts who say, we think this person is suffering this effect because of their defence service and here is our evidence, that we should have a system that is flexible enough to go, the presumption is on the strength of these two people, these two medical experts, this veteran should be supported by the Commonwealth. And if a subsequent review finds out that this is not actually something that is worth putting into the broader SOP, then that's fine. But the time frame, which the Royal Commission found in some cases exceeded 12 months for reviews of particular circumstances or SOPs, that affects the broader framework and system. It doesn't increase the suicidality of the individual. Now, I'm recognising that departments and governments hate the concept of unbounded liability, but I think we can put enough checks and balances in to make sure that we do avoid the situation where people go doctor shopping to find someone who's known to be supportive. I think there's a way we can do that, but we can provide the flexibility that we pick up those individual differences. We have a presumption of support. We keep that person out of that death, that dark spiral that they can so easily fall into by providing the support that the Chief of Army talked about, leave none of our mates behind, and then we take the review over a longer period to look to see if we should change the system. So that's a second reading amendment. We recognise that's not going to get done by September this year. It's a complex issue, and so the recommendation is that within 6 months there should be feedback coming back around that particular issue. And so I would encourage members on the government benches and the crossbench to support those two amendments, both the second reading amendment about looking into the RMA and the SOPs, to make sure they are fit for purpose and make sure that every individual receives just and timely support from the Commonwealth whom they have served, as well as the substantive amendment which puts in place the opportunity for stakeholders to have their voice heard around the design and function of this commission. And I understand that that will still be overlapping with the work that others will be doing to stand up the commission, but the best possible outcome would be if the next government, and I trust it will be a coalition government, but even if it's a Labor or Labor Greens alliance, whoever is in power, to seek the commitment that they will use this as an opportunity for co-design to make sure that what is actually implemented in September is fit for purpose and meets the desires and expectation and needs of the veteran community, including their families.